I sent it to you in your email, so you can.
It will open now.
Well, I just changed it to the.
Oh, you're fine. You're totally fine.
But I don't need it.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's right, you just said, I did a vote.
Well, I still have them on.
This little demo.
Yes, Deb. The roaming? Yeah.
When I run this morning, I ran by that. I remember it now. When I saw it, you don't worry about it. They're out all the back there.
I don't know if that's supposed to comfort me, but.
That should comfort you. Jules got back.
Hi, David.
Hello, how are
I didn't see
you?
you come in.
I snuck in.
You just flew in and then you
I
started.
did fly in, yeah.
And then that time. When we start timing.
Okay, that's what you used to do. I'm down here with the peasants.
Deb, do I have a phone over there? My other phone?
I don't see it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, right here.
What?
Is it Rachel?
Thank you. Just wanted to silence it. So
It went out today. Yep. And Doris sent you a little book.
yeah, so I'm excited today. So yeah, then I have two. No, actually both new freshmen at the same time.
It's got that on there.
She's visiting
What's that? Oh, just I look at it, it tells me what side it is wherever I go.
All right, let me try it again. Red Sun.
Listen.
It's not very good.
If you want to leave it,
But they gave us Hi, Megan.
And the youngest is still sitting there in college, graduating. Hopefully next year. That's the plan. He is in working with
Parent teacher conference. Mine doesn't have short time.
Was it just pop off?
You just hear her like a little, we should have like a little time.
And it's far better because you're not thinking about it.
Hey, Nick. Good, how about you?
Good to see you.
It's not.
Maybe now.
Give me something turning 66.
All right, thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the Lions Board of Trustees for Monday, March 12, 2018. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Sullivan?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Greenberg?
Present.
Trustee Caravas?
Present.
Trustee Wah?
Present.
Trustee Kerr? Trustee Drystad?
Present.
And Trustee Miller?
All right, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda, please?
I move we approve tonight's agenda. I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. The agenda is approved 5-0. Thank you. I just want to first just give some maybe instructions for how we're going to run tonight's meeting. We do have a limited amount of time to get through a lot of material, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of good questions as well. So we're going to hear two presentations tonight. We're going to have a presentation from Summit Housing Group and also from Thistle, Evergreen, and Paloma. Each group will be given 15 minutes to present. I'm going to ask the board to hold any questions during those presentations until we hear both. So there'll be a 15-minute hard stop at the end of each presentation. And then after we've heard both presentations, that's when we'll open up for board questions. Once the board has an opportunity to ask their questions of the group, we will open it up for public comment before we take any action. So we also have some representatives from the state here that oversee the CBDGDR funding that we are going to be using for these projects. So they're here to answer questions we might have as well. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off with a brief staff introduction.
Thank you, Mayor. We want to start this evening with a little background about this project. The town, as the trustees and most of the public probably is aware, have been looking for potential properties that might be appropriate for affordable housing. And we went out for an RFP on a property that we've been calling Lions Valley Park, Filing 8, Tract A. This is a little over 4-acre parcel that's located just east of Lions Valley Park and is currently zoned R1, but is listed in the subdivision improvement agreement as being appropriate for multifamily housing as well. So we went out for an RFP. We had 8 different vendors attend the pre-proposal meeting, and we had 4 proposals, formal proposals submitted and reviewed by a preliminary selection team that was made up of myself, the Planning Community Development Director, Paul Glasgow, the Lions Valley Park HOA President, Jim Crowder, the Planning and Community Development Commission. We had Dave Neufeld and Mark Browning both in attendance for that. And then Dave Wickham from Wickham Realty Group, who has first right on the single-family parcels that surround Tract A. So the selection committee reviewed the proposals and chose to bring in 2 different parties to present their proposals, one being Thistle Evergreen Real Estate Group in Kelowna, and the other being Summit Housing Group. Following our interviews with them, we have chosen to bring forward both of the parties to give their presentation to the Board of Trustees for discussion tonight. And I think instead of trying to go through 150-page proposals, they both put together a PowerPoint that summarizes those proposals. And as the mayor said, we're going to give 15 minutes to each, and then we'll have time for discussion and questions and public input.
Great, thank you. And I just first want to say thank you to both groups for putting proposals together. These are both very impressive and detailed proposals to help us meet our goals of replacing a number of units that were lost in our 2013 flood. We know it was a short turnaround time for these proposals, and we appreciate you being here tonight to share this with the board. So with that, is there any question?
Yeah. While we're setting up while the PowerPoint's warming up, I do want to mention that Allison O'Kelly with the Division of Housing was also our technical assistant for our selection committee and is here tonight. I don't know if you're going to talk about it now or later about the timing on the 9% tax credits. That was kind of driving the time frame for the RFP.
I'm thinking we'll get through the presentations
Okay,
first, and then
we'll
if
do
there are
that.
specific
Okay.
points that the state would like to make or clarify after that,
Get your
we can
little thing.
give you an opportunity.
Yeah.
No signal.
No, that means that is sensitive. Go upward a little bit. Kristen. Kim, or where's Kim? Can you assist?
I don't know what happened, sorry.
Okay,
There, the green light came on.
as long as you have a green light.
There it is.
I think you just signed.
Okay, right before the meeting, it all works. Of course.
Right until we-
Right until we need it.
It's on.
That's on, but this isn't. It's not talking to that. There you go. Okay. Do you know if you want lights off or on?
How's the screen? Can everybody see the screen really
Oh,
well?
it's not. Oh, you can close out that at the bottom. And Rusty, if you'll speak into the microphone, that's helpful for the audience.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, did it do it?
All right.
Wonderful.
It's just so sensitive. Just a hair up, yeah. There it goes.
Sorry, I have a projector in my car. Do you need it?
Oh, the projector's fine. It's the cord.
Connection.
It's the connection. It would use a laptop for some reason. There it goes. It's. There. I don't think it's your end, Devin. We did it earlier. It was.
I think that Kim thought it was over here.
As long as the green light's on there, it's good.
It's not.
There. The green light's not on? Oh, we're so time sensitive too.
You need a cable? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I gotta.
We have a different cable too. You wanna try it?
If you just unplug it, plug it back in.
There you go. Oh, we're back to seeing the. That's an interesting. Okay, don't touch anything. Don't use this.
No, I can do it right here.
All right.
Thanks for your patience.
No problem. Well, thanks first to the board and for hearing, Summit Housing Group's proposal to develop the piece of land that went out for RFP. My name is Rusty Snow. I work for Summit Housing Group. We are based out of Missoula, Montana, and are affordable housing tax credit developers up in that area. I'm going to give you a little history about Summit Housing Group and then go into our proposal on the site. We've been in business since 2002. Over that time period, we have done approximately 32 deals, give or take, with about 1,600 units, and these are all tax credit units, which is what we're talking about in these particular two proposals. We've expanded out from our home base in Montana and have obviously a large number of units in Wyoming, been successful there, and then over the last 3 years have gotten 2 projects both in Colorado and Utah in a similar type of structure and financing structure that we're going to be talking about, the use of tax credits. This is Centennial Park. This is our project. It's in Longmont. It's probably about 10 miles from here. This particular project is very similar to what we're discussing here today, as it also received $4 million of disaster recovery funds. Similar, this is a much larger project. It was 140 units as opposed to the 40 or so that we're talking about today. But it is a very similar financing structure and has been very successful. We just finished and got TCOs and COs at the end of last year and are going to be leased up by the end of this month. So a very successful project, and you can see we were able, because of the disaster recovery funds, able to really go kind of the extra mile as far as some of the fenestrations and finishes on the building. So this is just some additional pictures. Littleton Crossing, this is our project that's under construction right now in Littleton. It is a 9% tax credit deal. It does not have any disaster recovery funds, but it is another very good example of us taking something that the community had kind of proposed and designed and taking that and turning that into an affordable project. There was very strict regulations on what could and couldn't be built on this particular site. And we went through quite a lengthy process with the city of Littleton to come up with a design that was acceptable for everyone. And we're currently under construction, and we're probably about 8 months till completion. But yet another project here in Colorado that we think will be successful. This is a little bit different, obviously a little bit more urban type of design. This is in Salt Lake City, but this is an interesting project. It has a large mix of both market rate and tax credit units, which is kind of why we put it in as part of the presentation. We're not anticipating or assuming that for this project, but again, just kind of goes to show that we are capable of several different types of varieties in different types of projects in different areas. This is Stone Ridge. This is up in Montana, closer to Missoula. It is a very high-end town. Bozeman, Big Sky is the ski resort that's about an hour away. So it was a similar type of design process where there was an expectation for higher levels of finish than what you might see in some other affordable housing projects, and so that project is complete and full too. As far as the site itself, there's two types of tax credit deals, and we think they're both options on this particular project. They both have strengths. They both have weaknesses. Their option one is a 4% project. That is a tax credit project that has significantly less equity than a 9% tax credit project, but it also has significantly less risk as far as being able to actually get the award of those tax credits. The 9% transaction, which has some hard dates and submissions, that is a significantly more attractive financial situation as far as flexibility and other cost overruns and things of that nature that happen during construction projects. This is our recommended option as a 4%. It does use 100% of the $4 million of disaster recovery fund. It also presents a much higher income level for the units than the 9% option. We would be looking at doing just 50% and 60% AMI rents for this particular type of project. But the benefit of doing this type of project is there is no hard and fast date for submissions. It is a cyclical submission date for the state tax credit agency, CHAFA. And so there is time, I guess a little more time involved or ability to kind of take this through the zoning process, which we'll get into a little bit later, and is one of our concerns or weaknesses as it relates to the 9% option. A little bit about the project itself. Both option 1 and option 2 have the same design. There's not really much difference in those. We're kind of targeting 43 units, which was kind of what the RFP had suggested, and which was why we picked those numbers. We're looking at 2 and 3 bedroom units. Certainly a kind of a more of a townhome look to these to the units themselves, both 2 and 3 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, 1,500 square feet. I mean, all of this again is proposed at this time. Once, if awarded, there would obviously be a large discussion on the zoning application and how these this project is designed and the site layout. Just a couple other notes. The tax credit program, both 4% and 9% require enterprise green communities, which is a good green building standard that we're required to use. Again, just kind of the rezone, I think, is the biggest hurdle, and with a June 1st deadline, it can be done, and we would certainly need help from the city and from the neighborhoods to push that through. The 4%, again, just simply does not have that deadline and could be pushed back slightly on that. We are firm believers in making sure that the community has buy-in on this particular project. We don't want to be we want to be good stewards to our neighbors, regardless of what type of project that we decide from a financial perspective. We like to make sure that that community has buy-in, and we've done that successfully in many other cities in the states that we've done deals in. Timelines also accelerated on the 4% option, mainly because there's not a 4-month review period that you're waiting for CHAFA to make a decision. There is clearly some review period, but you're able to kind of accelerate that process. Again, we were talking on this particular project where the majority of the units would be 60% AMI. After we did a little bit of market research, we found that the largest need for units in the Lyons area is at the 50% and 60% AMI levels. And what that means is, as you'll see in the presentation, between 1 and 5 person families at 60%, you're between $41,000 and $63,000 a year. At the lower 50% AMIs, you're in the $34,000 to $53,000 a year in incomes. And examples of folks that we ran to in other locations are policemen, teachers, service industry. All of those income levels would certainly fit within what we're discussing. The financing of the project, this type of deal is more expensive. There is about $250,000 of additional costs that we're obviously estimating at this point in time, just with fees and additional construction interest and things of that nature that you just don't have on the 9% transaction, because there's additional equity that comes into the projects. The 9% option, it's a great option. It's the most financially secure option. And again, the reason for that is you're just getting basically double the equity into the project. It allows you to significantly reduce your AMI and income levels for these units, and we're proposing a 30, 40, 50, 60% for the 43 units. We're also proposing that in this particular option, we only use approximately $2 million of the disaster recovery funds, which would allow the city to go back in and do other projects in other areas. And the reason, again, that we can do that is because of the additional equity. We'll be taking on permanent loan, regular conventional permanent debt, in conjunction with the $2 million of CDBG DR funding. The largest issue that we see as part of this option is the June deadline. Now, the QAP, which is the guiding principles for the state CHAFA, clearly states that you are at a competitive disadvantage if you do not have zoning in place at the time of application. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it is clearly something that they want in place, and certainly I would think would want in place prior to giving any sort of award. And that, again, I think this is really our only major issue with this particular proposal or option. The timeline would be, I think, significantly longer. The June 1st date is the application. We usually see awards sometime in September. And then from there, you would probably, you'd have some design work and due diligence with your equity partners and lenders. And so you're probably looking, into closing, at best at the end of the year, probably more like the beginning of the year. And then you're in the middle of winter, and you're probably best served to wait until the spring of the following year. Or that year. Similar construction time periods and time frames, it's just getting to that start of construction that kind of pushes everything back.
Steve, 3 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay.
3 minutes.
So this is just a kind of an example of what we're talking about as far as the income levels here. So we've got a mix of 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. All income levels, all income bands, would be represented in this particular option, which is a great thing. It helps for market, it helps for financing. We just found that the largest need was in the 50s and 60s. Doesn't mean there isn't a need for those, it's just the largest. Again, you've got slightly less on some of the total costs there, but again, your financing has much more flexibility for cost overruns and soil issues, which I think may be an issue on this particular site. And so this is a great option. I'm going to skip to this. We did have some conversations last week during our interviews with trying to take this particular method and kind of spread it out a little bit more, and that's clearly very easy to be done. It's really more of a design function than anything. So I was at the office with our architect today and talked to her pretty extensively about it, and that's not really an issue for us. It really becomes a design thing. And then lastly, this is kind of just some renderings of what it is that we're kind of looking for from a exterior finish. Again, this is proposed, not written in stone, and certainly be happy to take any kind of input from the board or the neighborhoods for that. Just kind of one last note, it's kind of our opinion that the best possible scenario would be to try and get zoning and submit a 9% deal with the fallback of doing a 4% transaction. It gives, again, the most flexibility within our financing.
Thank you, well done. Great. And for those of you who came in late, we're going to hear both presentations before we ask any questions from the board or move on to audience comment. So at this point, we'll turn it over to
We're gonna have to read you.
want me to-
the fiscal group once they set up.
We need to probably switch places, and I don't want to jiggle the cord too much.
The new one seems to be working.
There you go.
And both of these PowerPoints, Mayor, were posted on the website this afternoon. So they're available if people want to look at them closer. Thank you.
Well, hi everybody. I'm Mary Duval with Thistle, and David Block and Ronnie Lucio will also introduce themselves. And I'm going to start us off by letting you know that Thistle is a nonprofit based in Boulder County that has a 35-year history of successfully owning, managing, and developing affordable housing. We are firmly rooted in the belief that we believe in people's right to want to live in the community of their choice for whatever reason that is. We've developed over 900 homes, both in for sale and apartment structures. They are all 100% permanently affordable. We developed those homes with a variety of financing, everything starting from local funds from the cities in which we work, to state funds, to county funds, both local and federal. And we have a lot of experience with the low-income housing tax credit program, with private financing, with public subsidies, and in bringing in innovative types of equity to allow people to purchase a home or to rent below cost. While nobody can quite top the experience that the town of Lyons had during the flood, Thistle also was impacted during the flood. We had damage at 4 or 5 communities, and we had many traumatized residents who had to relocate. And I think our best accomplishment was seeing the work of our staff out there during that very, very intense week, and then right away coming back and making sure that we had replacement housing to offer people who'd been displaced as quickly as possible. We're very excited to partner with Evergreen, and David and I actually have a very similar background and have done quite a bit of similar work together in the past.
Thank you, Mary. I'm David Block. I'm the Director of Development and a Principal at Evergreen Real Estate Group. We're based in Chicago, Illinois. We have been in business since 1999. We are a developer, a property manager, a construction company, and we do all kinds of development, primarily in the affordable space, but we also do some market rate. We do new construction, we do mixed-use development, and we do adaptive reuse of historic properties. So just a couple of the properties in our portfolio up there. This is a winner of the State of Illinois Historic Preservation Award, beautiful 1932 Art Deco hospital that we converted to senior housing. Here's the interior of one of the units that used to be a hospital room. Doesn't look like it anymore. And just 2 projects that I'll point out here that are under construction right now. We were designated by Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago and Chicago Housing Authority to do 2 projects, each about $30 million, with a brand new public library on the first floor and 44 units of senior housing above. And we had sort of star architects as our design team there. And I wanted to point out all of these projects were on extremely aggressive timelines. Each one of these projects was less than a year from project initiation to hard closing construction start. not that we necessarily propose to work that way or prefer to work that way. I had a lot less gray hair when I started these projects, but we seem to be drawn to projects that have these aggressive kinds of timelines, like what you're facing here in Lyons. Last note before I turn it over to Ronnie is our equity partners and our financial partners also often talk about us as a mission-minded for-profit company. So we're a for-profit developer, but I came from a nonprofit background, and there are other folks at my organization who came from nonprofit backgrounds, and we think about the world really through the kind of lens that Mary thinks about it, through the lens of a nonprofit affordable housing developer and operator. We found a terrific design partner in Pomona. Just very quickly, what Mary and I had done previously was through the federal Hope 6 program, the redevelopment of distressed public housing sites. These are some sites, and you can see fairly small scale development involved in some of those sites. And more to the point, the background that we have, and one of the things that brought us together with Pomona is we all have experience in community revitalization, in the planning aspect of community revitalization. I'm an architect and a certified planner as well. And so we think about more than just individual projects. We think about the impact of our development work on the broader community and how what we're doing is going to make that community better. Ronnie.
My name's Ronnie Lucio. I own an architecture and planning company in Boulder. We're actually at the north end of Boulder in the Holiday neighborhood. We have several projects in that neighborhood that are examples of buildings and planning that we have worked on. We are urbanists, as you see from our name. We believe in sensitive site planning that creates community. So compact, walkable, diverse, pedestrian-oriented communities. Some notable projects that we've worked on that include affordable housing aspects are the Wellington neighborhood in Breckenridge, which is in its final phase of the final 78 units are coming on board. The Peak 1 project in Frisco, which is 80 units. We're working on row homes in Stapleton currently. And my business partner and I used to work for Wolf Lion Architects. So one notable project that we've worked on with you in your community is the Cove housing project that's right around the corner from the site. Can I borrow the pointer? So when reading through the RFP, we noticed that there were some key topics that you had pointed out. And I'll just say generally they're connectivity, topography, and compatibility. The connectivity thing is easy for me to just start with, and that is your site plan that defined the exterior edges of this property proposed that there was a loop road. We went out to the site, we spent significant time out there, we've walked the entire property, have been out there on 3 occasions, and it's clear that there's major topographic change in this portion of the site in particular. So connecting McConnell Drive to Carter Drive is a key piece of the project. It also, so we are assuming that there's some connectivity, and we're showing it in this drawing. This is a concept drawing. It's meant to exemplify the kinds of things that we would consider doing. The topographic point, there's major topographic fall at this edge. In fact, currently there are 3 single-family homes that are constructed on these 3 lots. And what we've heard through the RFP is that there's a desire to retain that hillside and to provide a little bit of buffer between the existing community and the proposed community. And you can see that here, the buildings that we're proposing are happening on the lower side or the descending side of the hill. The other key piece was compatibility. Once you ascend the hillside on the western entrance, we felt that you could start to introduce building types on the backside. But this flat section where Carter would join McConnell has the greatest connection to the existing community. And you'll see that the building types that we're proposing here are smaller single-family homes that would relate better to existing buildings that are in place in the neighborhood. This portion of the site is flatter than the rest of the site, which is where those types of homes are clustered. And then other building types that you see here, which are single-family homes mixed with duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes, work with the topography and that they ascend with the grade. Lastly, I'd like to point out the public spaces are very important to us. There are green courts that buildings are oriented around, and there's pedestrian passage that continue to connect into the linkage of the existing trail systems, as well as make our proposal permeable.
Thank you, Ronnie. Just very, very quickly, wanted to point out from your 2014 Housing Needs Assessment Report, the general sense that apartments are inappropriate in Lyons, and so new rental units, and this is really what we're talking about, should be designed for compatibility with the community and not resemble traditional apartment complexes. And we've tried to respect the spirit of that directive. To Ronnie's earlier description, these are some of the building types that are proposed in his site plan, pretty small scale kinds of development, a mix of 1, 2, and maybe 3 and 4 unit buildings, but generally nothing larger than that. Programmatically, you want to talk about this, Mary?
Continue.
All right, so programmatically, we are proposing a collaboration between Thistle and Evergreen Real Estate Group as a single unified effort. And so as you probably know, Thistle was part of the team on the Eastern Corridor site. And so Thistle actually would be part of this site and the other site. We are proposing, at least what we proposed initially was the non-competitive 4% tax credit combined with the competitive Colorado State Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, and that is, and we'll talk a little bit about the schedule in a minute, and we'll talk about the combined approach versus the separate project sites in just a second. Programmatically, for this Lyons Valley Park site, we're talking about 40 to 50 units, and we heard more likely lower density is preferred there, with a connection financially programmatically to the Eastern Corridor sites. Affordability range, generally in the 50 to 60% AMI level, a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And we did propose a mix of 80% income restricted up to 60% of area median and 20% market rate. And again, all of this is preliminary or conceptual information, subject to change and subject to design refinement as we go through the development process. Initially, we proposed a sources and uses of funds that included first mortgage debt, the CDBG-DR, low-income housing tax credits, deferred developer fee, plus 2 local sources. And we heard through conversations with the selection committee, there were some concerns about whether those sources were available. So we have, over the course of the last week or so, been evaluating alternative development approaches, and we believe that there is an approach that allows us to proceed without necessarily relying on those other sources. Some challenges and caveats that we have come up with as we've gone through the process. We are concerned about the geotechnical situation on that site and the civil engineering concerns, particularly of that fairly steep hill as it comes up from McConnell Drive. We'll need to do complete engineering review of all of those. Neighborhood concerns about affordable housing from the president of the Homeowners Association, concerns about density on that site. And we need to take those concerns seriously. You know, we think that this is part of an important community conversation that has to happen quickly, but it's part of the development process. We heard about the concerns about local funding and the potential community benefits of this project to the overall community. You want to talk a little bit about schedule?
Sure, we have a fairly aggressive schedule which has us getting under contract and beginning due diligence right away. And, you know, we certainly have to acknowledge Rusty's approach and concerns because it's very similar to us. You know, there's some kind of tax credit application going in either sooner or later. And we had pursued, we looked at it very similarly to doing one application or another, or doing a combination of both depending on the sites. But getting our financing squared away certainly by next fall and having a clear picture from that so that in early 2019 you can close and begin construction. So
in terms of the overall financing projection, the combined scenario. And we're not going to run through the whole financing approach that we ran through with the selection committee, because we had about a 2-hour conversation with that group, and we want to respect the time here. But essentially, this is what we presented to that group, and so we showed in the overall 100-unit scenario, which we believe includes both the Lions Valley Park site and the Eastern Corridor site, or the green site. There is significant and very important economies of economic scale that allow this project to proceed, to deploy all $4 million of the CDBG DR funding to generate the 100 units that the community is looking for. And as I mentioned, there are some approaches that I have not shared with you in the interest of time for eliminating the TIF funding that we showed here and the Boulder County home funding. And the way we do that essentially is by looking to the CHAFA scoring requirements, which we sort of took as a more aggressive approach than I think we need to. So the way you do that is to go more with the 50 and 60% units rather than the 30 and 40% units. We can go to longer term debt, 40-year versus 35-year, and some strategies to reduce operating costs further.
So just very quickly, 2 sites with 1 team will make for a far more efficient project in terms of delivery and financing. It makes the spread of the federal subsidy in here much more easily done, and you've got a team here that is familiar with this site and familiar with conditions in Lions and familiar with all the funding sources.
So we'd like to be your partner in this redevelopment effort. Thistle and Evergreen and Pomona, we are a terrific team, and we hope you'll...
And we're out of time.
Thank you.
It was kind of like speed dating, but who knows what.
Do you want to leave this whole thing for now?
You might want to leave it up because we may need to go back to the presentation.
So, if possible, if you want to start with this one, there's just still.
Well, we're,
Fine.
let me kind of
It's up. I've got it. So.
say, I think the way we envision the questions is that I'm going to go around and let each board member ask their questions. They might have a question for Thistle, they might have a question for Summit, they may have a question for the state. I think what we'll do is just kind of go around the guys. I'm going to ask the Mayor Pro Tem if he'll start. And let's try to ask a few questions each, and then if we have more time, we'll come back around again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. So I think my first question is for the state, actually. So there's some conversation around the use of the full 4 million.
Yes.
But not 100 units using the full 4 million. So how does this, what is the state's reaction to that, the idea that using the full 4 million of the DR funding, but not getting to 100 units?
So Dave and I probably will both have an answer to that, but am I close enough to the mic? I'm pretty loud speaking, so I'm trying to make sure I'm not yelling into the microphone. The short of it is, our action plan for the CDBG DR funds allowed up to a certain amount per project, and for multifamily that's 4 million, which is why the Boulder County Collaborative Communities collectively decided to set aside enough for the maximum amount allowed for 1 new construction rental housing project for this. We knew going into this that there is not a site in Lyons that allows realistically 100 units on one site. I think we're all on that same page. We want to see this $4 million used in the best way possible. Obviously, we want to see it leveraging other federal sources to make sure the money goes as far as it can toward as many units as possible. We do have a cap on the dollar amount per unit investment for single family housing that also relates to rehabilitation being done on homes that were damaged, and that caps at $100,000 per unit. So I think we can agree that we definitely wouldn't be able, with the way the action plan is written, the same way for multifamily, to see more than $100,000 going in per unit, but that's not something you would typically see in a grant fund for new construction of rental housing anyway. So looking at the proposals you see before you, we're looking at if you were using the whole $4 million on one site, maybe a maximum of $40,000 of CDBG-DR per unit. If you're going into 100 units, obviously it's more than that. But at the end of the day, we want to see you guys get the best project that's feasible for you and use as much of that money as possible to get as many units. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Not particular. I guess I'm a little bit concerned about the timing. And I did have a question on the 100 units between the two sites, because my understanding was the first site was going to have 40, and now we're going to combine to have 100. So that would mean you'd need 60 on one site. So if we start making too many changes in this process, I'm worried about the expiration of the funds. So I just want to make sure everybody's cognizant of timing and being able to get this project and get this money spent down.
Why don't you go ahead and remind them what the timing is to spend it?
The deadline is September 2019 is when we're supposed to have the last dollar spent.
And that means drawn out from HUD, paid to the state, paid out to whoever the developer is. So realistically, the developer who's going to come to us for a reimbursement needs to have incurred those costs probably at the latest in August so that that money can go out the door. So obviously the earlier that can happen, the better.
Just to follow up, just to make sure I'm really clear, and I apologize if you explained this already and I just don't get it. I just want to make sure I understand that. Should we pursue a project that had that was for fewer than 100 units, we could still expect that as part of our application to do this, we could count on the full $4 million, despite the fact that it's fewer than 100 units that we are attempting to fund through LIHTC.
I think the only thing that, to that end, that I didn't address earlier is that at the end of the day, we're required to make sure that we're not overfunding a project. The CDBG-DR funds come with a regulatory requirement to make sure that we're not being wasteful of funds. And the way that the Division of Housing does underwriting for funding applications, as is done by CHAFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, with applications for tax credits, is to make sure that we're not awarding in excess of what's needed to make a project feasible. So if the tax credit award and the other financing sources involved in the project budget results in an application to DOH, the Division of Housing, for $4 million, but the gap to fill is less than $4 million, we're not going to award the $4 million. We're going to award what's appropriately necessary to make that project happen. But other than that, it is our intention to help a developer use up to $4 million. Yes.
As long as it's the last money in.
That's correct, for sure.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Oh, sure.
I really
Thank you for
appreciate
asking that specific question.
Yeah, I have a question now for both Summit and Thistle. So could you talk a little bit about the pre-development funds that would be necessary to get this to submitting to CHAFA and also to get the land under control to start the rezoning process?
Just very simply, we have access to funds that we use for pre-development expenses. Some of it is our own money. I'm sure David and I will have a conversation about that, about the equity that we'll be putting in to make sure that we get through the due diligence and are able to submit applications for financing. We also use many CDFI sources, which are local community development financial institutions that typically fund this kind of transaction. So we don't anticipate with any of our approaches that we would have an issue with pre-development financing. We're ready to bring that money to the table.
Yes.
Similar, yes, we use our own funds for pre-development costs. It's assumed that we're going to take on the responsibility for getting to the closing table, getting to the application submitted. Any architect's fees, design fees, any of that would be our burden to bear.
Okay, thank you. So just for me to be clear, that the town would not be asked to contribute in any way to pre-development costs or the cost to get it, so that either of you have the parcel under control.
Not that I can foresee.
Not from our perspective.
Not from us either.
And is your model to own, then you would own the land?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And then I had something you said made me think of one more question, and it's escaping me right now. So, what is your plan for getting the land under control specifically, so that either of you are actually the owners of it and be able to then go through all the pre-development, the geotech, and the rezoning, and submit an application?
So the RFP is pretty clear about, that currently the city has an option on the piece of land, and that option would then be assigned to either the development partners or development teams. And I believe that option runs out in August of this year, which in theory should be able to give you enough time to get that rezoning process completed, or at least far enough along to where everyone would feel comfortable taking down that land. And so our proposal was to go through that process and execute on that contract.
The only other thing I would add to that is the option references an appraisal. So it is an option essentially at appraised value, whatever the appraised value is. So we would have to go through that appraisal process and substantiate the value of the land.
Can I just add a clarification? I think it's not to exceed the appraised value. It's not necessarily guaranteeing to pay the appraised value.
Okay.
And part of, if I can contribute to that, when we worked together on drafting the language for that purchase agreement, we deliberately made it that way so that if the developer were to choose to pay in excess of the appraised value, which we would not recommend, in the event that CDBG-DR funds are being used towards the purchase, we wouldn't be able to reimburse in excess of the appraised value, nor would CHAFA look at that as a good use of funds for the acquisition. So it was drafted that way with the expectation that that's how the developers usually tend to structure their negotiations for a purchase price as well.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Trustee Preston.
One question is, immediately after the flood, when we were looking at housing, we developed a preference policy, a local preference policy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and if you are you willing to commit to something like that, or at least to the extent allowable by regulation?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our standpoint, I mean, the zoning process, which I would assume would take that into consideration as part of the design as we go through it. I mean, yes, we certainly want the city to get what they want as far as preference and housing.
You're talking about tenant selection and giving preference to Lyons residents.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, first is Lyons residents who were displaced,
Yep.
and then on down through suburb.
And I think that would be a requirement from the DR funds too.
That has been a requirement. Anyone who is awarded CDBG-DR funds for new construction has to provide preference in lease up to households who were impacted, and particularly those who were displaced. To be clear, that cannot conflict with fair housing regulations. Sure. So in the event, so they need to draft their tenant selection plan to make sure that all things being equal, the resident who is displaced would get preference over somebody else.
We're in the process right now of leasing up a property in Boulder that has DR funds in it, and so we have some familiarity with that.
Okay, second question relates to, and I know it's in the detail, but wasn't stressed within the limited time of the presentations, and that relates to maintenance and how maintenance is managed long-term.
I go first. We'll probably have similar answers. I mean, we have our own in-house management company, and we manage all 1,700 units that we do across the 6 states that we're in business. And so, I mean, management, the front end of the transaction for us and the underwriting that has to take place is probably the most important part of this, making sure that we're setting aside enough dollars from an operational standpoint to make sure that not only repair and maintenance are being completed, but that we're able to staff at a higher level and make sure that the maintenance techs have the certifications that they need and things of that nature. And so, I mean, that's where it starts for us, is on the very front end before we take even a dime of debt. is making sure that we're funded well enough on an operational standpoint. And then on another note, part of the program, the tax credit program, is it's a 15-year project, and so we own, and I'm sure Thistle does too, everything that they built through the tax credit program, from the start, and it's just a process in a different asset structure than other developers, market rate developers might take, where they build and then they sell and then they're done. That is not something that we are proposing for this type of project. We'll be here for 15 years, no matter how you look at it. And so we have a obviously financial vested interest into making sure that the property is kept up at a high level. And then in addition to that, you have DOH and CAPA doing annual audits physically of the properties. There's a lot of oversight on these types of projects. Some may say that's a bad thing, but for the neighborhood and in the surrounding areas, it's a good thing because those projects are looked at on an annual basis.
It also, I think it really starts with the design and the selection of materials that you're putting in there. What's the longest, most durable, maintenance-free product that we can offer? Is it a plank? Is it a hardy board? Is it another cementatious siding? What can we do for our roofs that will withstand the hail, that shed the snow right, and what kind of windows can we have that meet the very strict energy efficiency regulations that we want to follow? Will offer the lowest operating cost for us and for the residents. Then, making sure that it's designed appropriately, it's spec'd appropriately, that it's constructed appropriately, and holding the contractor accountable to be able to come in there. As I don't have to tell you this, Ronnie, just build it the way it's drawn and make sure that we know about what those changes are. And then we really focus a lot of time with our contractors on warranty and making sure that they're held accountable for any warranty issues that come up in the first 12 months. We do pretty extensive resident orientation when we move them in about how to use things, particularly now. As I said, we're just doing a move-in today. And the high efficiency furnaces and water heaters, you never want the resident to touch them because they're all pre-programmed. It's like getting a new car and everything's electronic. It's the exact same kind of technology. We, as Rusty alluded to, we have pretty strict reserve requirements through either the tax credit program or the lenders, and then we try and over-reserve a little bit if the property can afford it within the tax credit structure. There are opportunities for the owners and the general partners to fund any kind of operating overages that happen. So someone's always on the hook to make those repairs. We take a lot of pride in the communities that we have, and so there's nothing more fun when somebody comes to town like David and I can say, hey, you should go see what we built, because they look really good.
So in the interest of time, we didn't really get into this, but just so that everybody's clear, our team is a joint venture between Thistle and Evergreen, but Thistle will be the property manager for this property, so out of their office in Boulder. One other thing, to Rusty's point, one of those library projects I showed you, I'm working with this big international architecture firm called Perkins & Will, and they build tens of thousands of condo units a year. And they were complaining to me that the standards for my affordable housing projects are typically much higher than the typical market rate condos because of all the regulations that we need to comply with. So it's an interesting perspective on what we're building.
All right, I'm going to turn over to Trustee Carvis.
Thank you for your answers on the maintenance and how you're building. That was one of my questions, Trustee Tyson. Thank you. When both of you hold the properties in ownership, will it be on the property tax rolls of Boulder County or off?
Right now, they're projected to be on the tax roll.
Us too.
Okay. The property maintenance and that.
Okay, Trustee.
So you both touched a little bit in your responses to the RFPs about where there were opportunities hiring locally established contractors. Can you both just touch a little bit on that?
I liked what you guys have going on at the library, where you have a job fair, and inviting people to come in and provide their qualifications and look for opportunities to participate. There are a couple of other federal requirements. One's called Section 3, which has to do with making sure that locally owned women and minority businesses as well all have opportunities to participate and benefit from the economics of the deal. And I think our challenge in Boulder County really is making sure that we get enough contractors and enough subs and enough people to come in. So we'll really take all comers and set up a process to do that. We have a good, very good, a lot of good partners in local GCs, and are excited to work with David's group that has some real economies of scale around construction. So we anticipate that we could be able to open that up quite a bit.
And in almost all of our developments, we use federal funds in some form or fashion. And so we have Section 3 requirements, we have Davis-Bacon, its prevailing wage requirements, we have the MBE, WBE requirements, and so we are very familiar with those. And we tend to think that we do a decent job of that. In every community where we've worked, we have exceeded the local hiring and the minority contracting requirements. We take that as a point of pride.
Similarly, we too use federal funds on most of our transactions, and our construction group is also very familiar with going into the marketplace, whichever marketplace that is, and finding those subcontractors and whatnot. We also have a couple of relationships on the general contracting side of things that we might use in this particular instance, just because of the site and some of the possible geotechnical issues that might arise. And so, again, we'll be using those similar federal regulations and making sure that the subcontractors and material providers, whomever else, are on a local basis as best as possible.
Another question I have, kind of more from my basic understanding, but how do you set the rent rates on the units, and then how do you sustain that so it remains affordable throughout time?
I'll take this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're really regulated. Both of us are talking about using the tax credit program. So the tax credit program looks at the area median income for Boulder County and then sets the rent level at a level that's attributable to some percentage of the area median income. The number that I have off the top of my head that's plus or minus right on, is that the area median income for a two-person family at 60% AMI, so the rent would be set to be affordable at a family that earns about $47,000 a year. And that can be mother-child, father-child, it could be two working people, it's whatever combination of at least two people in the family is. So that's actually a regulatory agreement called the LURA, the Land Use Regulatory Agreement, that's issued by the state as part of the tax credit program, and that sets the starting point for the rents. And then every year, CHAFA, after HUD delivers it, will update whatever that amount is. So if the area median income goes up $2,000, then the rent will go up a tiny bit commensurately. We are able to charge more rent, providing that the market will allow it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. It was more, kind of how do you sustain that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that made
when
a
we
lot
do
of
a pro
sense.
forma, whether we do it for Allison or for CHAFA, we have to really look at the harshest conditions possible. So we're only allowed to pretend that the rents increase a very little amount each year, and also assume that expenses are going to increase. So
And the expenses go up faster than income.
Yes, the expenses typically go up 3% a year. They give you a 2% rental increase. They want you to say that you're always going to have at least 7% of the property vacant. So it's all that's called underwriting. So they're looking at all your financial projections and saying, okay, how bad can it be, and can this then still have this property work? And that's what really makes an affordable project so much different than the market. I mean, Rusty's stuff looks great, David's stuff looks great, it all could look as good as market, But it is qualifying the residents, managing the property to that limited amount of income that really makes, and within that regulatory environment that's always being overseen, that really makes affordable housing something different. And no one understands that until they're in it, but it is very complicated business.
It is. In there, it's probably important to note too that there's a financial impact, right? If you do go out of compliance, right? If you do rent a unit at something that's higher, it's significant financial impact back to general partners, which would be us in these situations. So we watch that very, very closely, and the management company, this will be the management on this one will be ours. I mean, we have a compliance departments, and we make sure that that is the case on an annual basis, and as does the investor too. So.
And you'll hear it from the residents. They'll say, why do I have to submit all this paperwork? Why do you have to talk? Why does my employer have to literally fax how much money I make? You can't scan it, you can't take it over the phone. You know, it's a lot, it's high cost to everybody. But when when they've got that secure housing, then, then everything else for their family's life becomes so much easier.
All right, thank you.
Sorry.
Are you finished? Did you have these?
I have one more, but in the interest of time,
yeah, let's kind of do this. I do want to get to the public comment as well. So my question is for each of you to answer. Can you speak a little bit to your expectations? Sorry, excuse me. And the impact on your financing structure based on what contributions the town might make to the project?
Sure, yeah. So in both of our proposed options, we're assuming full taxes, and we're assuming 100% of the development fees paid by the city. I would state,
By the city. Wait,
I'm sorry, by the developer,
Okay.
paid to the city. I apologize. Meaning all of the development fees, water, sewer tap, all of those fees would be paid as part of the development cost. We're not asking for any funding at all from the city. I would note that in our option one, which is the 4% non-competitive without the state tax credits, that there is less room for error, and that if there was significant issues with the site or something to that nature, then there might be some discussions about waiving some of those fees, but that's about the extent that we've gone to. As far as the 9% deal is concerned, if able to rezone, we would anticipate 100% of those fees being paid.
Okay, thank you.
In our proposal, we looked at the fee rebates for the water and sewer tap and for the permit fees, but we also made reference to potential community benefit. Maybe because I had libraries on my mind as I was, working on this proposal, I know that the fundraising efforts for the local library are ongoing. We are showing a portion of the project basically funding a community facility. It could be the library. It could be something called a clubhouse that would provide an additional community meeting space. That's really part of the community conversation, and so we have built that into our budget, and it's actually comparable or even a little higher than the amount of tap rebates and permit fee rebates that we're showing. And to the other question about local funding from Boulder County and potentially TIF, I think we've found ways within our financing to eliminate the need for those. So I think that the fee rebates that I'm talking about would probably be the only request to this body for funding.
All right, thank you. And then my second question is actually for Thistle. With your project, if we were to take the Eastern Corridor, a piece of it away, and do it apples to apples, would it still have the same financing structure, and would you still only use $2 million of CDBG-DR for just the Lions Valley Park piece?
Lions Valley Park, possibly. I can't, I think that we show a pro forma that works with just the Lions Valley Park being developed with a partial amount of the CDBG-DR. Is that correct?
We do, but we don't recommend that, I guess. There's a method to our madness, and we recognize that we have maybe colored outside the lines of the proposal a little bit, but there are significant economic economies of scale, both on the capital side and on the operating side, to combining both sites, particularly if you're looking to use the 4% tax credits, which carry greater fixed cost. And so our primary recommendation is to put these two projects together, which is really why we reached out to Thistle and said, hey, you guys are already working on the Eastern Corridor site. Wouldn't it make sense to do it? And our economic analysis proves that out. But I hear the question about an apples to apples comparison. We could do it, but it is, in our view, it's less than optimal.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm gonna kind of, we'll come back to the board after the public has an opportunity to comment. With this, we do have full room. I do want to ask, though, that the comments are really related to the topic at hand tonight, and they're not just general how you feel about affordable housing. So if you have comments about, feedback about the proposals that you've heard, the presentation, if you have questions that you didn't hear the board ask that you'd still like to have answered, we're not going to answer those questions directly as people come up. We're going to write them down. The board is going to continue discussion after that. So we're going to limit comments, public comment, to 2 minutes per person to try to make sure everybody has a chance. If somebody agrees with your position, or if you feel the same way someone else does, you can simply come up and say, I agree with so-and-so. It'll help things keep moving. So at this point, I'll go ahead and open it for public comment. If anyone would like to come forward, give your name and address for the record, and we'll have 2 minutes for each person. Come on.
Nick Angelo, 4089 Ute Highway. Terrific presentations, both of you. A lot of information. I think, considering the importance of the issue to all of us, that we should proceed immediately on the rezoning. We have plenty of time to qualify for the 9% tax credit if we pursue this vigorously. So I think that that's the direction that we should give the PCDC immediately to start the rezoning and have it proceed to the Board of Trustees and take a public comment on it in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Others for public comment? I see, but it looked like they want to comment.
Sorry.
Okay.
So Jeff Baltrish, 349 McConnell Drive. I would thank you for your presentations. I checked the calendar, so hopefully in the future it'll be scheduled a little sooner because I got an email from the HOA about tonight's meeting. So it was hard to gather my thoughts and such, so I apologize if they're not really in any particular order. The road loop was mentioned, so I was wondering if as a cost-cutting option to meet the requirements, if that could be considered a trail instead of a road, in the sense that it would connect the two communities, or I'd like to think of them as one community but two different parts as opposed to two communities. But that would be another option, because I know that was considered challenging. There wasn't a lot of mention of cost to the town, and we're a small town, so I wanted the Board of Trustees to ask questions just to educate us about that, the risks there. There was a concern in the HOA newsletter about displaced residents being able to afford the units, so trying to address that, but also make it a permanently viable part of the community as opposed to something where we're going to have to start raising taxes because of the units, because that's not going to make anybody feel like together. You know, I don't want it to be a divisive thing. I don't know if they'll be part of the HOA with similar landscaping requirements and things like that, so that'd be interesting to hear about. And I don't know if property taxes are pegged to market or to the affordable rate, because I know costs rise faster than the rents do, which was addressed. I don't know how that's actually, in 20 years, how that works. So that would be something I'd be interested in learning. And then if it isn't viable, because that was brought up, the income is less than the cost, I don't know what happens, to Lions or the development or the residents that live there. So those are my thoughts that came up tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oops. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else. that would like to have,
Yep,
okay,
sorry.
come on up, sorry.
Just trying to be thoughtful and give other people a chance. My name is Jim Crowder. I'm
Can
the
you come into the
president.
microphone?
Oh,
please? Yeah,
sure.
Sorry.
That's part of our recording system, that's why
Oh.
the microphones are so
I don't
important.
mind, they're just so intimidating. My name is Jim Crowder. I'm the president of the Lions Valley Homeowners Association, and was part of the committee that reviewed these proposals. And let me just stipulate, it was an amazing exercise for me to be in the room with the sort of creative design genius that I saw from all the proposals, and also you know, the way that it's being approached. I took a few minutes to, well, more than a few minutes to read the Lions Valley Comprehensive Plan, which was done in 2010, as I recall. Brilliant document, describes completely the sort of community that I want to live in. And then I took a few more minutes to read the Lions Affordable Housing proposal, or plan, actually, which also talks about lots of different things that I would completely support. Infill, I mean, if we refer to the documents that we spent a fair amount of time in brainpower on developing, describing how we'd like our community to be developed, we would quickly see that this doesn't in any way accord with those design ideas or original plans. The thing that concerns me about this personally, and I'm not speaking in the voice of the Homeowners Association, is density and mass and the lack of compatibility with the rest of the immediate neighborhood. I also have some concerns about the whole rezoning process, and I'll just express them, and I can completely stand corrected on much of this because I'm no community planner, I'm no lawyer. But I believe the zoning in the area right now for the whole parcel, including what I've seen described as Tract A, which is not platted at all, as far as I can tell, is R1. R1 does allow us to build duplexes. So it didn't have to be all developed as single family. It could have been developed as duplexes if I've read the zoning ordinance correctly. Which leads me to another point about zoning. You can change the zoning and you can increase the density. May I have an extension? Just to
finish your
thought.
sentence. Or?
Yeah, thank you. But it still doesn't solve the problem with platting, because as I understand it, we couldn't build an 8-plex unit across 2 or 3 lots that are zoned even R2. You'd have to replat to accommodate that. All of those are time-consuming prospects, and
I'm gonna have to cut you off there. I'm sorry. We're trying to keep it even for everyone. Thank you. I think we got it. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi there. I'm Clay Ucell, 113 Estes Court. Actually live quite close to the proposed development. Awesome design work. Thank you, guys. A couple of comments on the just overall designs. I forget, Missoula, Montana is all I can think of.
Yes, Summit.
Summit. Had a really good holding the cliff face is a concern of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I live there, it's a gorgeous view. Holding things back from the cliff face and limiting the size is important to me. One of the reasons why I'm in support of this is acknowledging that this is R1 zoning, as it is, and private land. And my back of the envelope calculation had 25 houses in there that could be developed by right, with no hearings, I think that's how I understand it. And each of those houses could be pretty big. The average house size in our neighborhood is probably 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. Again, the Summit plan was a little bit easier to see. There was 12 buildings there. You'd noted duplexes or triplexes, 1,200 to 1,500 square feet per unit, which to me is a little bit bigger than the existing houses, but not much. So I'm not as concerned about compatibility with the neighborhood. I think that you can actually design them quite well. I think Lions Valley Village, which you were involved, is a great example of that. Those actually look quite like single-family dwellings. So anyways, thank you. I support this project, and I hope we can make it work. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? right, we're going to move on to board discussion. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for those who spoke, and for hearing this presentation. Like Victoria said, there are presentations on the town website. We actually got the full packet, which was very detailed, and we saw all 4 proposals. So we did, I also want to take a moment to thank the other 2 groups who didn't get to participate in the interviews, but they did take the time to submit strong proposals as well. We just felt they weren't, the group, I should say the committee, felt they weren't as compatible with Lions. So at this point, we'll come back around to kind of hearing from the board, and if there are any final questions that you feel we did not get to ask that you'd like to ask before we start discussion. So Trustee Drysdale.
The only question I still had was your comment about any measures that might relate to security. Free.
Sure, I can go first. Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as we do in some more metro areas where you're gating off and fencing and, you know, fobbing off security. But we would certainly put a, you know, security system within that would reach around to kind of the entrances, I guess, on Carter to make sure that even though, you know, folks coming in and out of our property are the folks who are supposed to be there, and, you know, really monitor that. We have strict policies in place as far as our management is concerned too, as far as who can visit and how long and for, you know, at what times and things like that. So that's it's clearly going to be something that needs to have a plan in place, and something that should be part of this process so that the neighborhood, you know, feels safe.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question because I don't know what the issues are, but I would say that Thistle's communities that are in Longmont are all part of the crime-free multifamily housing program, and that really relies more on good design and a lot of resident education, a lot of neighbor-to-neighbor interaction, so that things that are amiss or seem to be against the lease, where we have a contractual obligation, that those are brought to management's attention. I would hate to assume that this neighborhood, because of its affordable nature, is somehow given to more crime than other communities, because I just don't find that to be true. So I think that will dictate what's appropriate, but would agree with Rusty that good management and really knowing the residents and making them feel comfortable in communicating with us about what's going on in the community is very important. Also, community policing, interacting with the constable area in town, and making sure that people know what's going on in their neighborhood is very important. Sounds like a great opportunity to really interact with the broader community right there as well.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. I guess this is for both. So with 4%, it really, one of the impacts of getting 4% LIHTC instead of 9% is how it impacts the 30 and 40% AMI units. So do either of you feel like you have a pathway to 2 to 3 30 and 40% units if we end up with the 4% LIHTC?
I can go first on that. It's hard to say right this moment because everything is so dependent on how the initial or the final design comes to play out here as far as this process that we are going to have to go through. But on a very general note, we could put some in there, but I think we would probably want to, as we said, we assumed development fees and things of that nature as part of our proposal. We would probably want to make sure that we had the ability to waive some of those fees kind of in return for some lower income units. Just, you know, in full disclosure, we just don't know what the costs are right now. So it's hard to say, and it's hard to commit to that. I can commit to it on a 9% deal because there's plenty of equity, but on a 4% deal, it is much harder for me to commit, you know, today to say that.
And so follow up on that, I'm sorry, and then Mary, feel free to chime chime in is, if with a 9% deal, is there a way to increase the number of, say, 3-bedroom units at the 50 and 60%, and have fewer 30 and 40%?
So we typically like to do a more equal balance of the income levels, meaning 30, 40, 50, 60s at 2 and 3 bedrooms kind of split evenly. We could certainly look at, and that's going to be driven almost solely by the market in the market study that we're going to have to do for these applications. I will say that we did do a little bit of market research, and it's the primary market area does include Eastern Longmont, and so there is quite a bit of need once you break out into those areas. The lead significantly reduces once you just look in the town of Lyons, so to speak. But there is a lot of flexibility, but we are going to want to make sure that we're hitting those market kind of milestones, for lack of a better term, that Chaffo would like to see.
And one other thing on the 9% is that it's very competitive. So, it's so oversubscribed, it's so difficult to get that making those trade-offs for AMIs is really important to being able to score enough to even be in the running.
So, at the risk of maybe being impolite, because we've all been agreeing with each other here, we've all been saying, oh, what he said, and so I'm going to disagree with Rusty a little bit. You have a preliminary market study. It's from 2014. It's your housing needs assessment study that you did, and that showed that the majority of the people who were displaced and have not returned to Lyons are at the 30 and 40% level. So in our initial proposal, and again, this gets to the method to our madness, why we talked about 100-unit combined development as opposed to an isolated 50-unit development, is it gives you more economic flexibility to serve those lower income levels, even with a 4% application. The understanding is we would do a 4% plus the state tax credits. And it's because you can generate some additional management efficiencies. Again, you've got fixed costs in management, you've got fixed costs in development. If you spread those costs across a broader base, that gives you more financial flexibility to serve the entire community and serve what you're doing here. So I apologize if coloring outside the lines has created some discomfort, but we are offering you our professional assessment as developers who've been doing this for a long time about the best way to do this. And we think you do have the tools to do this right. And so it's really, it's your call, essentially.
So can I follow up?
Sure. Can I follow up on that too?
Yeah, sure. So
I didn't put it in our presentation, but if you read the package, then we actually did reach out and did a market analysis of the current conditions. And we won't go into all of that right now, but the information is there for you, and we think that the market need is a little bit different than pushing everything down to the lower incomes. The size of the project is something that the town should look at.
So,
Did you have another question?
Well, yeah, actually, for the state again. So could you alluded to this a little earlier about the 4 million and the us considering it being what I'm hearing a bit of as part of our discussion and deliberation needs to be about, is this a single 100-unit project, or are we looking at this separately? And so does the state have any guidance for us as far as how we should consider the two separate, are they considered two separate projects? Are they, is the 100-unit approach, is that considered one project? I guess I could use some feedback on that from the state as how this will kind of go through the state process and how you look at what I feel like I'm hearing is fund one big project on two separate sites, or are we considering this two separate projects? I'm trying to get a handle on that.
So there are a couple of different things to consider in this. First, as they discussed, the RFP that was put out was on a specific site. So that's why we've been talking about making sure it's possible to compare apples to apples on the proposals. What I will say is it is definitely allowable with the tax credit structure as it is to close on a tax credit partnership that covers more than one site. They don't have to be adjacent locations. So potentially closing 2 tax credit project partnerships in different locations is something that's legally allowable to do and definitely does give the economies of scale that Mary and David have been talking about. In terms of the proposal that you're reviewing today, I think it's important to remember what the RFP was that was put out and to be mindful of the property that's under contract in relation to what other opportunities you have in the town. I am not as familiar with the RFP that was put out for the Lions Village East property, I think you're calling it the Greens, as I am with this specific site, the Tract A that we're discussing. So I am not as able to talk about the nuance of combining the 2 sites in terms of where you're at in zoning and site planning for the other site. That might be something that Victoria might be able to speak more to, or the mayor. I don't want to speak for somebody else. Is that something that either one of you would want to talk to on that part?
Well,
oh, and David wants to.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I am a little bit concerned about the procurement process and following the state guidelines. If we put an RFP out there for 40 to 50 units, and then we award 100 units, and we get inspected by the feds, and they say, show me your procurement, it's going to be problematic because what we actually awarded is different than what we put out for bid. So from a tax credit side, I think we're probably okay and that's feasible, but if we're going to do something different, and it's different in a couple of different ways, and we're also going from 40 to 60 on the other site, I think we'd almost have to rebid the project and get new proposals for everybody. Now that said, if this project were to win, and that was part of the financing, that can give them a competitive edge on the financing part of it, but I don't think we can award the 100-unit project over the others when in fact the RFP was for 40 units.
I mean, we disagree with that, but I'll,
Let me kind of just clarify, I guess from the board's perspective about where we're at with the Eastern Corridor project, and what I guess I can say, I feel like where that stands is we gave direction to staff, I think at the same meeting when we approved the purchase and sale agreement for the Bell parcel, to pursue whether or not the Eastern Corridor property could meet the timelines for the affordable housing DR funding.
For the 9%.
For the 9, well, could it meet the, I mean, both of them still have to be spent by September 2019. Mm-hmm. So the original proposal, I think, for the Greens, when we were looking at, they are kind of, I see them as separate projects more than a combined project, but I think it's, and I'm kind of confused a little bit by your answer, Allison, because, so I'll come back to the second, but I think that the other challenge with the Eastern Corridor project is it was not timed for a 2019 tax credit application. It originally came to us as a 2020 application. So the question was, can they change that to be a standalone housing only to meet our September 2019 timeline? And is there a purchase and sale agreement that could come before the board that would really bring us a housing project outside of the commercial project? Because I think that the question is really, that's a bigger concept than just looking at this as we're trying to do. It's not just housing. That's a housing and commercial project. And so I think you'll hear, I think a lot of questions from the board about how exactly does that work. My impression was we could not have CDBG-DR funding. I guess I, from prior conversations of trying to understand all this, is that you couldn't split one project over 2 sites. So was I wrong in understanding? So you're saying now you can have one tax credit application that has 2 different locations?
So that was the part, I'll just stand up in case people are coming up. It's difficult for me to be able to articulate it well, explaining it from the tax credit perspective separately from the CDBG-DR perspective. Our office, the Division of Housing, is administering the housing portion of the CDBG-DR funds. CHAFA is a separate entity that administers the tax credit, so I realize it's a little confusing having me speak for both. So when I said that you can combine the two in a financial structure, that is specific to something that's allowable with the tax credits. If the CDBG-DR funds are going into one specific portion of that, and in this case, as we've discussed, the RFP did go out for this proposed site, then if the CDBG-DR funds are awarded to that particular site, they can't also be used somewhere else. We haven't gotten an application for CDBG-DR funds. The intention of this was to select a developer to proceed with this particular site. And then once a project, and in that case I am deliberately including however that were to land, if it's the tax credit application is awarded to fund both sites, we would still need an application to come into us for the CDBG-DR funds after the fact, showing what the financial structure is for that whole proposed project. I definitely agree with Dave's statement. The RFP was put out specific to this one location, so I do want to be mindful of that. And like you said, there was a different timing originally proposed for the Greens site that is different than what is described in the proposal that came in to include both properties. So that's why I know it's a little complicated for you guys to look at. I'm in the same boat. We definitely did draft an RFP with the intention of the one site to make it as smooth as possible with one location to be considered. I don't know if that answers everything.
No, I think it
or
does.
not.
I think that's
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna kind of, do you have any final questions on the side you want to ask before we start?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I have one more.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a couple questions just from listening to the presentations tonight. What I heard Summit say is if you applied for the 9% tax credits on this site, you would only need approximately 2 million of the DR funds, and 2 million could still be used toward another project.
Yes, in theory, and again, I mean, we have a...
Based on timing again.
Timing,
Would still have to
and
be
based
spent.
on where we sit right now, again, I mean, it's a very difficult to commit to
I know, until
exact
you've done due
dollars.
diligence.
But,
I understand that. But
but
there would
yes,
be,
generally
there would be
speaking.
funds available for another project.
There would be funds available for another
Okay,
project.
and then I just want to confirm that I heard Thistle Evergreen say that 80% of the project would go toward low income and 20% market rate. Is that still standing?
That was the original proposal, yes.
Okay, does yours have any market rate?
Not assumed
On
at this point in time, but in a 9% scenario, we could easily put market rate units.
All right, and then one last question. You guys mentioned that you're still counting on the state low-income housing tax credit to go along with the 4% option. Have those been allocated yet by the legislature for next year?
The Senate has passed it.
The Senate
And
has
it's
passed it?
in front of the House Financial Committee on the 19th of March.
Okay, so it's really close.
Yes.
Okay.
And so to our presentation and to
Uh-huh.
some of the discussion earlier, if we don't have access to that credit, then
Yes.
it is much harder for us to put in 30 and 40% AMI units.
Yes.
If that credit is available, we can deep target a lot more easily, with the structure that we originally proposed.
Okay. But you're not proposing using 9% solely on this site? You would try to get both sites under control enough to apply by June?
I think we would have to, I think we've looked really carefully at the 9% deal, and I think that yes, we'd find a way to put in an application if that looked like it was the best financing scenario.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Could I speak quickly to the procurement concern
Sure,
that was
yeah.
raised here? So I know that there was the concern about whether the 100-unit approach would require a rebidding or a reissuance of the RFP. The two library projects that I showed you that we're working on, we're construction right now, we were procured as developers through the Chicago Housing Authority. So the federal funding, procurement, and all that. And the proposal that we submitted was very different than the end product that we actually ended up building. And again, we were procured and offered our best professional advice to the agency on how to pick us. We made reference to say, hey, if you pick us for both of these, you know, we can actually have some economies of scale. So we're not new to this undertaking, and Chicago Housing Authority is subject to the same federal 24 CFR 58 requirements that, or 85 requirements that that DOH is under. And so our general view is that you have enough wiggle room in your RFP language to say the town of Lyons reserves the right to do what is in the town's best interest. And I think that gives you very broad leeway to make this decision, at least from my perspective.
Well, and I would just like to point out, you're here tonight, and so we decided that we wanted to hear your proposal.
Thank you.
And even though some concerns were shared, so I appreciate you being here. I'm going to actually kind of try to get a sense of where the board is. So if Mayor Pro Tem would be willing to kind of start off with impressions.
I have to go first. Okay.
Yeah.
I think about trying to do something that's really doable. And how can we make a decision so that there's a really clear path forward and we're going for some perhaps lower hanging fruit, as opposed to just reaching for the top of the tree. And based on the presentations, based on the conversation, based on community input and the fact that this conversation's been happening for several years now. Right? My first inclination is that that low-hanging fruit, the most doable thing, is to pursue, see if 9% is doable. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you use 4% as a backup plan. Because I'm reading the narratives about the concern about being able to qualify for 9%. I know that if you're in process, it's perhaps possible to amend your application. But from hearing tonight that it might be possible to pursue 9%, use 4% as a backup, and really just focus on this one place of Lyons Valley Park right now, and go for something that's really doable. And from the presentations, from the information we got in the packet, and looking at the RFP responses, it seems like Summit's option 1 is the most doable thing we can do. I heard them say tonight that they could try for 9% and use the 4% as a backup plan. And I also think one appeal to that is the flexibility in that in either one, they're not asking for town contribution. And so I think if it came down to the need to contribute tap fees in order to either make the project pencil or to get to some lower AMIs, or to close any gaps in the funding, say, for example, the geotech comes back and we can't quite get as many units on there as we right now are thinking is possible, we have that sitting in our back pocket as a way to make the project happen. So I think my first inclination is Summit's option 1, with the idea that they would try for 9% and use 4% as the backup. I think that's my starting point.
Trustee Dries.
I'm looking at numbers that kind of push my personal decision, which is that 9% is preferable. At least some couple of units at the lower end, 30% AMI, for example. And that's based on an analysis that I did of who are likely, and I know it's not the same as the market analysis. I just thought about the people I know in town who work at various places and how much they make, and like EMTs and sheriff deputies and teachers and starting wait staff at local restaurants. And I think we really do need some things at that lower end, and also sooner occupancy than later, and realizing that we probably do need to have a 4% backup plan that may take away some of that, but based on that, I would agree with the Mayor Pro Tem.
Trustee Carabas?
Based on the timelines mentioned in the proposals we were looking at, and we're spoken, and I am also leaning towards the Senate option 1, with going for the 9% also, because as I was looking at numbers and looking around town, as Trustee Drystad said, I would like to see some possibly the 34% in there, a few in there, and if you can follow up the option. Or with 4% as backup, that'd be great. But I was leaning towards the Senate option 1 also.
Trustee Miller?
I'm really torn. I definitely agree with what everyone has said about the summit proposal, and I think option 1 with the summit proposal is definitely the easiest and most straightforward route for us to take, but I really, really like Thistle's proposal. But I like it from the combined aspect, and I guess I'm having trouble stomaching that against what the state is saying now and what they've said in the past. But you also have a lot of confidence that you can make that happen. So, I don't know, I really like the proposal. I think it's very in line with our community. I like the style of housing. I think that your idea for your development on the Eastern Corridor really depends on the affordable housing component, and I like that as well. I like the idea of having it spread into 2 places. I mean, that feels easy to me as well. And the economies of scale of it, I'm thinking about staff time, I'm thinking about interactions with state government on moving this through, and so those are my points, I guess. I mean, I think in my gut, I'm really leaning toward Thistle at this point. I know it's hard, but that's where I am.
We do have one trustee that called in. Trustee Miller, are you still on the phone? Maybe she's not, or she might not have. That's okay. Oh, she's there. Did you want to share any thoughts? I'm sorry, I forgot to come around to you at question time.
No worries. I have a couple of thoughts. I really liked the proposal from actually both parties, but I guess the Thistle one in particular was my favorite, mainly because of the forethought with the whole the way that they were trying to buffer the rest of the LVP from, you know, the community, the affordable housing community. So maybe that would make everybody a little happier. I do think that both of the projects together would be a little bit tricky as well, and that the Eastern Corridor would only benefit from affordable housing. And we definitely need the lower AMIs involved in there somehow. So however we need to get that done. And that's kind of all I've got, really.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me share some thoughts and then we can, I think, see where we're at. You know, I thought both proposals were really strong, actually. I thought the architecture, the Polona piece was particularly compatible with the neighborhood. I liked the design. I liked how you clearly spent a lot of time at the site, and I appreciated that very much. I did go to the Summit website and actually looking at a lot of your properties, I think clearly good quality work there as well. I like that you showed some of those. It shows kind of potential. It's hard from these drawings sometimes to get a good sense, but so I feel confident that both of you can design a property that will be acceptable and more than acceptable, that'll really add to the neighborhood in terms of character. I thought particularly your market analysis was really insightful. It's really hard to get data like that. And so I read that really thoroughly. I tend to agree that I think there's probably more demand here for the lower AMIs than that might have revealed. And I am a business owner in town, so I know what the local folks are making is, you know. So I don't have any concerns that if we did have lower AMIs that we would have trouble filling those units. And so, you know, I do have a strong desire to see the proposal, you know, shoot for lower AMIs, whether it's the 9% option or whether it's a partnership with the town to contribute something to help get them there. The one, you know, I tend to be a person who likes to I like the big projects. I just think in this case, I kind of went back to what did we set out to do as a board? And as a board, we said we wanted to get an affordable housing project off the ground before the end of the term. And, you know, I like what we have, the ideas and the concept that Thistle has proposed out east. I think we should continue to talk about how to do that, and maybe the timeline for 4% without DR funding down the road. People do these projects all the time without DR funding still. So, you know, I think because it's coupled, if we had a purchase and sale agreement already in place, and if we had already talked about what the path for replatting, zoning, and subdividing and all those steps look like out east, I might have a little more appetite for that, but it feels like that project is just too far behind at this point for me to feel confident combining these two. I feel like what we also have to keep in mind is we have citizens that are really still struggling to find ways to stay in town. You know, so I like the idea of focusing on this parcel, this project, moving it forward. I was really impressed with Summit's proposal, and I felt like I thought your proposal was the strongest actually, in terms of having the most complete financial analysis. It answered most of my questions, honestly. So I would be supportive of moving forward with Summit at this point. So I don't know if anyone, you had another comment?
Thank you. I think you covered most of what I was concerns about. Where are we with the Eastern Corridor? And tying the two together raises concerns for me. I think if this allows us to stay focused in one place and do the best we can in one place. And I think we have a really great opportunity to accomplish something that we set out to do. So, and that's why I would support Summit in that one spot.
Can I have one more question for the state?
Yes.
In regard to the procurement issue, since we are really sensitive about that here in Lyons, if this was awarded and it was found to have a procurement concern by the auditors, who would be responsible for that return of that funds? Would it be the town as the recipient or one of these two? That's important to me too. If we're the contracted, you know, or is it the developer?
The procurement is being done by the town of Lyons, so it would not be the developer in terms of that. My office is the one that would get the finding, and typically what happens is they will propose a remedy. OIG's remedy, unfortunately, is usually you owe us that $2 million back. And then we begin a negotiation process with the community development side of the house versus the OIG, and our first step would be to fight this thing as best we could. And it really depends on what funding is available and what decisions are made. Usually what happens is the state then reaches back down and says, sorry, we got to find another funding source. There are cases where the state might have extra funds and they may be able to cover it at their level. I can't say at this point, not even knowing if, when Head OIG is gonna come down, you know, what the landscape's gonna be, you know, 2-3 years down the road.
All right, I'm gonna ask the board if anyone would like to make a motion.
Thanks, Dave.
I move that we approve Resolution 2018-31, filling in the blanks for accepting the proposal of Summit for an affordable housing development in Tract A, Lions Valley Park, filing number 8, and directing staff to finalize a memorandum of agreement with Summit for consideration by the Board of Trustees.
I'll second that motion.
Is there any further discussion? Well, first, I want to thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the work. Clearly, both of you, all the parties really put in an enormous amount of work. You know, we're still interested in talking with you about what you've proposed out east and figuring out if that's a viable project by itself. So I hope that you'll continue to work with the town on that proposal.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to call for the, do you have a comment?
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
Is the motion to move forward with Summit on a 9% first? And then if not, a 4?
Does this proposal
Just
need
as
to be
Emily-
that specific?
No, I guess this is just a memorandum to work together with them to move it forward, so.
I
okay.
think at
Is
this
that
point.
the intent of the board?
Yeah, I would
And that's what I
want
heard.
you to work with, and my answer to that, I guess, and I'll let the board decide if they agree, is I think the developer is the expert in this area, and I think we have a lot of due diligence. I think we need to remind people that we still have many other steps that probably have to, a couple of more hurdles before we even know if we can continue to meet the 9% timeline would be my assumption. So I think we heard from the board their support for pursuing the 9% tax credits if feasible. So that would, I think, be the answer.
So my understanding is that if it's determined at some point soon that the 9% is not feasible, we are still in agreement to pursue 4%. That's how my understanding from listening to the presentations, listening to the state, listening to the board discussion, that there's support for pursuing that. And that more decisions will come before the board before we go in either of those directions. And I understand, I mean, it's not as if, okay, done and we're going to see something built. It's really, there's a lot more that's going to come before either this board and or the next board. And that's my understanding of what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, my understanding is we're picking a partner tonight, and we understand there's going to be lots and lots of discussions and negotiations going forward about how we make this come to fruition. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. And it does pass with 4-1. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And my apologies to the PCDC, we ran over and took up some of your time, so apologize for this.
We don't have a camera.